Hey everybody, I think we've got a good one for you today. This is Proverbs chapter 13, verse 23. The fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice. I'm going to read it again. The fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice. Let's define some terms here. What is fallow ground? Fallow ground is when you have plowed the field, you've gotten fruit from it, but it's been allowed to go dormant and you haven't planted in it for a while. So it represents ground that could be productive, but that is not currently being productive. So Solomon is saying a poor man who has a field and it's not being worked, it could be worked and it would be productive, but injustice is preventing that. There's a great example of this in history that I want to talk about. It's called the Holodomor. You probably are familiar with the Holocaust. The Holodomor is something else, but it's very similar to it. When Soviet Russia first came to power, under Stalin especially, the Ukraine was the breadbasket of that whole region of the world. That's where all the grain, all the wheat came from. And when the Soviets came in, they launched this campaign against a class of people called the kulaks. And they were those who were productive, and this was the whole communist thing, right? Like if you're productive, then you must have oppressed somebody. So the kulaks were taken away. And then the definition of kulak slowly expanded to include more and more people to now the farmers in the Ukraine, which were supposed to supply this entire empire, were not able to work their fields. The most productive members were gone, and there was all these fields lying fallow, and they weren't able to provide bread. And whatever bread they did provide was taken away to the cities. Injustice, right? So many people, millions of people died in the Ukraine because of this. The fallow ground of the poor would have yielded much food, but through injustice it was swept away. It was a tragic time in history, and this is what Solomon is getting at here. So in a person's life, when they are poor, when they are downtrodden, I guess you could apply this across domains, but we'll focus on the poor, they could be productive. They have skills, they have ability, they have opportunities that they could do, but injustice can get in the way. Now, injustice can be from top to bottom. I just described something that was very much governmental, top-down injustice, right? But this can happen at the corporate level when smaller businesses have something going on, but the corporate entities that have all the power and all the money, they begin leveraging for laws to be passed that might sound great, but it represents a blow that the corporation can absorb, but the small business cannot. And so they could be productive, but they won't, and they're just going to get swallowed up. That's injustice. Make no mistake about it. This can be social. It can happen in a community where maybe there is a person or a family or a group of people who could be contributing, but there's something about them. Maybe there's history, maybe there's not, where the people just don't like them and they get shoved to the side. It can happen on a personal level at your job. You could be productive for this company. You could make money. You've got ideas. You're ready to work hard, but you've just got those bosses that have it out for you. And that happens, make no mistake. And it could be a whole gamut of reasons. Sometimes people are just nasty. But it's not just, you're not given a fair shot. And so what you could produce is swept away. And the Bible tells us that this ought not to be so, and that just makes sense, doesn't it? In fact, the Bible gives us two principles to abide by. Number one, in the law especially, and through the prophets, God demanded that his people take care of the poor. Make provision for the poor. You weren't supposed to harvest your field all the way to the corner so that the poor could come and glean after you, for example. But the second principle was that the poor who were having provision made for them ought to work to plow the fallow ground, right? So Paul in 2 Thessalonians says that if a man is being idle and is unwilling to work, he ought not to eat. He ought not to be supported by the church. He ought not to be supported by whatever agency is involved there. So you've got this two-sided thing going on here, and Solomon is focusing more on the first thing, that there ought to be fair and equal ability for people to work whatever ground they have, and that somebody should have the opportunity to break up their fallow ground and to work and provide. But then the New Testament and other places in the Old remind us as well, and so has Solomon, that if you got the opportunity to plow the fallow ground, you better get out there and do it, or there's really no sympathy to be had for you. The goal in the end is for the poor, for everybody to have a fair shot, to be able to work their fallow ground and see what they can make of it. And there's something about that second principle that I want to get into now, because we as a nation talk an awful lot about making provision for the poor. I think it's a very noble thing that we do. But what you can do is you remove their ability to plow their own fallow ground, and you take people entirely under the wing of a church or a ministry or the government or whatever it is. And that's not a good thing. And the reason is, number one, they ought to be given the opportunity to go and do their thing, not just to be given something. But on top of that, number two, if everything you get is coming from a higher organization, authority, even another person, you become indebted to that person and dependent on that person. So if all your money is coming from the government now has a control on you. If everything's coming from your mother-in-law even, right? If everything comes from them and you're not doing the work, they can control you, and you might not like it. But so there's another side to the coin you see here. I thought it was important to get into that. So how do we apply this? Personally, you got to be fair in all your dealings. If you're a manager, if you're a boss, if you're a parent even, your job is to make sure that everybody does well to the best of their ability. And that's not always the most business sensible thing to do, but you have no right to be out there keeping people down, abusing people in the workplace. That's not your job. Allow people to do the best that they can do, not to be resentful or envious of the guy coming up behind you who might be able to leapfrog your job and do better, so you try to take away his chances. Don't do nothing like that. Even in your own life, if you're providing for the poor, you got a son or a daughter who's in college and maybe they're getting married, they're having a rough time, and now you've been kind of supplementing their income. Don't come around and try to control and dominate and boss them. You want them to get out there and plow the fallow ground, not to be dependent upon you. But also you must be ready to work. If you're going through something where there's injustice in your life, I hope you get out of it, but I hope that your goal is not, I don't like the way these people are failing to take care of me, I hope somebody else takes care of me. Your goal should be, I want to be, as Romans 13 says, to owe nothing to anyone except to love them, and then to be able to get out and make the most of the life that God has given to me. That's what benefits us all. When we're all out there fulfilling Adam's mandate from the Lord, right? Tend the garden, have dominion over the world, get out into life and make something out of it. Beware of those people that are trying to take away responsibility from the individual, and also from those people that are using their position to keep the individuals from fulfilling their responsibility. So this is something we're into as Christians. We're into justice. We're into mercy. Jesus brought justice and mercy together at the cross, right? God is just and the justifier, and so should we be. So the fallow ground of the poor. If you've got fallow ground, get out there and plow it. And if you are the one keeping somebody from plowing their own fallow ground, get out of the way. It's not right for you to do that. God bless, guys.